Redbear's eyewitness testimony reveals the hidden truth of Custer's final stand. In a series of flying arrows and the war cry that characterize this historic conflict between two worlds, Redbear, a seasoned scout, recounts the most intense moments of the Battle of Little Bighorn. With raw and vivid detail, he brings to life the chaos of gunfire, where the fate of a nation was at stake. Sit back and let's take a look at the cultural clash that shaped the American front. His gripping testimony draws you into this captivating story. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel in order to support this community. Custer's camp. The scouts pushed down the dry run, and when Redbear arrived, he ordered the charge and specifically instructed the S-Scouts to seize the Dakota horses from remarked, "There are plenty of provisions here." One of the S-Scouts entered the teepee, tasted it, and discovered that the others were already circling it, lashing it with their whips. He joined them, and they paused at the edge for approximately half an hour. One of the S-Scouts left for a fallen Dakota warrior and ate some of the meat. Then Custer showed up with Fred Gerard, who said, "You were supposed to move if he did not show his white soldiers who are less brave than Ware. It will take him a very long time. You lack courage. I'll take his weapons and deem him a woman." One scout replied, "Step aside and let the soldiers take the lead in the charge." Custer declared, "If any man among his soldiers outpaced them, catch them and chastise them with both words and gestures, saying, 'I directly into the Sioux village.'" While the S-Scouts were looking at the teepee, Custer, who had told you to charge ahead, not linger. "You have disobeyed me for a long time." The scouts chuckled and indicated that they were prepared for battle. They advanced, but Redbear saw that, approximately 50 yards from the lone teepee, Custer veered to the right with his men. Gerard continued with the S-Scouts, joined by Young Hawk, Goose, Back Fox, Red Star, Strikes 2, Bloody Knife, Little Sioux, Bob-tailed Bull, Forked Horn, Red Foolish Bear, Boy Chief, Little Brave, and One Feather. They rode hard, charging down to the Little Bighorn, and as they crossed the river, they came closer to the Dakota camp. They then split up once more, with 6 scouts heading straight for Boy Chief and Red Starlid, followed by Strikes 2, Black Fox, Little Sioux, and one on the right, where the Dakota horses were grazing near the timber. Pharaoh. The group with the bleeding knife pressed toward the Dakota camp's point. Far ahead, Bloody Knifer returned with 3 horses and yelled, "Someone take these horses back to the hill!" The group included Booty Knife, Young Hawk, Goose, Forked Horn, Little Brave, Redbear, and Honest Form. Redbear didn't see the Booty Knife because it was in the dust, but he later realized who it was, so he dismounted and started running. The Dakotas, who were lying out of sight on the hills or buffs, returned, converged at the Sioux camp's point, and opened fire with their carbines. They had 2 Crow Scouts. The Dakotas, lying out of sight on the hills or buffs, retreated farther to the left, and Redbear saw soldiers lining up across the river to his right. All was fire. Forked Horn, at the timber's edge, called out, "Come this way." As they crossed toward the Dakota village at Thieford, the Sodiers caught up with them. They were firing from less than a quarter-mile away. No one was on horseback at that time. They dismounted and started shooting. There were no white soldiers or officers here. When Bloody Knife called out about the horses, he said, "I'm going to strike an enemy's shoe." The white soldiers were shouting and calling out. When Redbear got to Forked Horn and dismounted, he saw a Dakota horse that had been shot in the neck. The soldiers hadn't dismounted yet, but we were ready with the S-Scouts. When Forked Horn called out, Young Hawk then rode up to Red Hawk and said, "Uncle, I have struck the bay horse and its cheek," approaching the line where Young Hawk was standing. Young Hawk struck the horse. "Mine. I gave it to you. You have a rope? Take the horse for yourself." Redbear answered, "What's the use? We're in the middle of fighting, and I might be killed. I'll haveness for it." Young Hawk then rode back to his position as their camp was getting ready to charge. He said, "Let me fire one shot at the camp, and then let's retreat." Just then, Little Bravey emerged from the timber and warned that he had overheard the Dakotas in the hill, because they outnumber us. As Little Brave mounted to fire, Redbear held his horse. Little Brave swiftly returned, alerting Redheart that the Dakotas were about to charge, and Little Bighorn. The Dakotas were hiding in the bushes, firing from the ground. A savage wave of Dakota horses were riding toward the ford when the Dakotas opened fire and led the horse, but a leaning tree struck, shouting and firing. The area was swarming with them, so they were advised to mount and ride back to the timber, then across the river. As they rode toward the river, they saw through the bushes toward the river, coming under fire from an ambush just across the horse's saddle horn, stopping the horse. He repeatedly tugged at the horse's head until he then sought Soldierson's horseback far ahead. He moved forward, though the saddle girth broke, causing him to lose his extra cartridges. He emerged from the timber, lost sight of Little Brave, but saw someone trying to mount but falling twice as he was caught beneath him in the canteen. Eventually, he managed to mount and chased after Little Brave, who had not dismounted and was retreating toward the timber. At that point, a deep cut caused the soldiers' horses to fall, and he heard them continue to follow Little Brave until the dark figure in front of them turned left. Thinking it couldn't be Little Brave, he heralded straight on, passing the point where the rider had been shouting. He turned left, avoiding the cut, and left the struggling soldiers behind. Redbear's horse stumbled and fell, throwing him off. The horse then bolted toward the river, and Red gave a chase. The warrior's face was painted red below and yellow above, and he still held his carbine in his right. Suddenly, he painted a Dakota warrior, riding toward the horse, and dragged it behind him, bringing it to a stop. Red was caught up, but the horse was forehead and eyes. Redbear shot the Dakota who fell from the horse. The horse reappeared up, wheeled back, and fed. In this open area with few trees and many rose bushes, a long dry limb got caught in the bridle hem upstream on his right. Spooked and jumped around, making it difficult for him to control it with just his left hand. Redbear could only now discover the piercing whistle of the Dakotas and the constant firing of carbines. He followed the horse as it emerged from the water, saw the Dakota horse swimming behind it, swam to it, caught it by the mane, and they crossed the river together. The dark bay horse had a white streak in it for the forehead and a string of deer hooves around its neck that rattled as it swam. This horse crossed the river a little upstream from him. Redbear approached the location where the Dakota horse had crossed, hoping to drive it toward Little Brave. Little Brave's shoes were walking slowly toward the ridge, but not upstream toward Redbear. He saw what Little Brave had already crossed and was injured beneath his right shoulder, with blood flowing down his white shirt. The horse was terrified and ran past Redbear a few yards away when he saw that the saddle was covered in blood in front of him. 5 or 6 white soldiers emerged from the bushes, having crossed the river, and Bobtail Bull's horse followed them. The Dakota horse Redbear was driving dashed after the others. Suddenly, through the bushes on his left, downstream, came Bobtail Bull's horse, its reins and rope flying, mane and tail flowing in the wind. The Dakotas were firing down at them from the hills above, and Brave was still riding slowly and waving his hand at Redbear to be careful. Redbear said, Little Brave's dismounted and grabbed the dart railing from one of the 2 horses, either the Dakota horse or gestures or quest to catch one of the horses for him. Ashisone was exhausted. While Little Brave and the men rode into the moccasins in the river and injured his bare feet on the rose bushes, the horse was scared and dragged him through the bushes, forcing him to lose his upstream near the end of the ridge. The horse then hauled him to the Dakota firing line. Redbear eventually removed the rope and mounted his own horse. Redbear didn't see Little Brave again, so he assumed that all of the soldiers had been killed. As Redbeard Barrow got close to Reno, he slapped him on the chest with an open hand and yelled, "Scout!" Thinking that Redbear was a Dakota warrior, Reno's men raised their rifles to shoot, but as Red got closer to the ridge, he saw many soldiers in retreat. At the front was Reno in a panic, shouting back, "The Sioux!" When asked where, Redbear pointed down the ridge, indicating the enemy's position. An officer with 3 stripes had a handkerchief tied around his head, foam collecting in his mouth and beard, and his eyes were wild. A stray bullet grazed Redbear's coat at the armpit, and a Dakota horse charged at them. Red tried to catch it, but the soldiers shot the animal down. The Dakotas eventually retreated and stopped firing. The remaining scouts were grouped with Reno's group, which came to a brief stop, but Reno pleaded to keep his men from falling apart. Young Hawk, Bloody Knife, Bobtail Bull, Little Brave, Forked Horn, Red Foolish Bear, and Goose had been riding slowly in his direction. As she crested the ridge, Redbear saw white clouds, who suggested that they join the other scouts with the horses. Redbear led 2 horses, and Cloud, a Dakota scout, told him that the Iroquois scouts had captured some Dakota. After failing to capture the injured horse, Redbear mounted and lost sight of Little Brave, had found, and White Cloud led one. As they approached a small hill, they saw 4 riders in the horses, but had not yet returned. They headed back toward Reno's position, thinking they were Dakotas. But the horsemen were actually Crow Scouts who recognized Redbear and extended warm greetings. Redbear called back White Cloud, pointing out the unique red shoulders painted on the Crow Scouts' white shirts. The scouts stopped, and the group rode together. They reported that 2 of their comrades had been killed on the ridge and that they intended to retrieve their bodies before the horses returned as well. The scouts started to arrive, starting with Bull in the water, and then returning. After a while, Redbear and White Cloud suggested that they strikes 2, Red Star, Boy Chief, One Feather, Soldier, Stabbed, Strikes the Lodge, and Little Sioux. Later, more scouts arrived with a herd of about 40 captured horses, including Charging, returning to Reno's position, assuming the scouts wouldn't return. They discovered Reno and his soldiers still there, and soon after that, the scouts had retrieved Fresh Bull, Red Wolf, and White Eagle. Pretty Face, who had joined them from the pack mule train, was also present at Reno's position. Redbear instructed us to return to the Powder River, where the rest of the scouts, wagons, and provisions were. If we were defeated, we were to follow Custer's orders. Stabbed rode around, speaking. "What were we doing, scouts?" Hadn't seen the mule train, but Pretty Face was probably with the herd scouts on their way back. The scouts talked about the deaths of 7 of their friends, and Redbear was relieved to be reunited with the others. Stabbed ordered some scouts to take the herd, while the others stayed behind to repel the Dakotas. The soldiers were half dismounted, and Redbear didn't see any officers. The 10 scouts leading the horse herd had barely started their journey when another lodge, Little Sioux, White Cloud, C.A. Rue, Dakota Scouts, ESC, Half-Breed Dakota Interpreter, Dakota Scout, Bear Waiting, and Metoxa joined the group tasked with keeping the Dakotas away. The scouts who went with the horses were Bull in the Water, Charging Bull, Red Wolf, White Eagle, Red Star, Pretty Face, Red Bear, One Feathers, and Petat. Redbear and his fellow scouts continued on, passing the lone teepee and traveling 6 miles beyond it by sunset. They followed the trail they had taken earlier that morning, and soon after, Bull caught up with them, sent by Strikes 2 with a message to hold their pace. As darkness fell, they heard 3 shots fired ahead of the herd, alarming the scouts. They joined the group, and after sunset, Red Wolf and Bull in the Water rode ahead of the herd. The Dakota tents were being dismantled, and they feared a pursuit. They swiftly surrounded the herd and rode forward, reaching the Rosebud Valley in the darkness. The remaining scouts drove the herd from behind a cloud of dust, determining that the Dakotas were approaching and they needed to flee. They chose fresh and dirt flying from the trail behind them, indicating the Dakotas were in pursuit. The 2 scouts who had been ahead fell back upon hearing the shots and rejoined the herd horses and rode ahead. They also took new horses and rode around the herd until they saw the black line lead their horses over the bank, sliding down to the waterhole. Tired and thirsty, they stopped at the edge of the timber and each scout made a makeshift drinking area with their hands and drank from the hole as it was filled with water. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough water for the horses, so they rested and went ahead to find a muddy waterhole over a cut bank. The scout called out to the others, and they conversed. Whole Buffalo mentioned that he knew the way out, and they followed him to the Rosebud River, arriving at midnight. They continued on to the present-day Cheyenne Agency, arriving at dawn. They then ascended and advised them to remain put for the day, as they could observe their surroundings in all directions. The scouts stopped and looked down at the site of the Dakota's Sundance, scavenging for food among the camp remnants and a high ridge. The Dakota scouts resumed their journey, riding through the night until they arrived at the camp where the dead were resting, with some scouts sleeping while others kept watch. At dawn, they discovered meat and hardtack for breakfast. They crossed the Rosebud River at the same spot as before and found that Stabb's scout had found remnants of a recent campfire, including cooking cans. They concluded that this was the party that had already crossed ahead of the Minhaste after identifying their tracks from Stabb's mule. The party's breakfast camp was ahead, and with the time now around noon, they proceeded down the Rosebud to its mouth, arriving at the old camp and last parade ground, Rosebud's Bank, to find boxes of partially spoiled hardtacks. They packed these onto their saddles and continued on their way. The party, led by Strikes 2, then crossed the Tongue River and arrived at the location where the soldier had been clubbed to death. They then proceeded to the Powder River camp, where they discovered Redbear's party, a company of infantry and Owagan train, led by the commander, wearer of the white hat, from Fort Buford. Through interpreters, the Santae, Half-Breed Dakota, and Crowbear, Grove Entra, the S-Scouts shared their knowledge of the battle with the officer. He gathered the S-Scouts and told them to bring in their horses, choosing the best two to take by steamboat to the Bighorn River mouth. The two scouts rode their horses across the Foolish Bear and White Cloud to deliver messages to the officer who had crossed the Elk River to the Bighorn mouth. They returned after a few days to summon Strikes 2 and Bull in the Yellowstone or Elk River, pulling a small raft with their carbines and a message bag. They crossed the water to transport the mail to Fort Buford. I hope this first-hand account gives you a deeper understanding of the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux. Stay tuned for more videos where we'll delve into more first-hand accounts of different battles. War of 1876. Foolish Bear and White Cloud then crossed the river and rejoined the other scouts. Redbear never saw Little Brave again, believing that all the soldiers had been killed.